Well, hello there. I saw you were early, Karl. Thank you for coming back. Hey, Mr. Chris. Hi, guys. I find it so extraordinary, Dene. Your camera, I guess it's because of your internet connection, seems to be so much better than anyone else's, particularly my own.
That's so weird. You all look great to me.
Like the meeting we just had, you were just tack sharp, like it was filmed, not a streaming thing. But anyway, finally, after all these weeks, my fiber's being upgraded tomorrow, so I'll see if that makes a difference. Yay, yay, yay. Very exciting.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. Rob, you look like you're on some kind of a very interesting chemical trip of some sort.
This
That's
is
a
my novel.
Fibonacci.
My
That's your
novel
Fibonacci.
shell. It's a Fibonacci. Yes.
Your Fibonacci.
I meant to turn it off.
No,
But,
don't turn it off.
no, but that's great because that means it's a naughty Nautilus, so that's good. I like that.
I'll leave it on then.
Yeah, leave it on.
Hey, Rob and Mark, I've got David Kolb coming to see me in February for a couple of days to work on his different hypertexts we're trying to save. So we're working on hypertext's resistance. We're finalizing sprawling places and hopefully getting things started to redo Socrates and the Lamberts.
Yeah, good.
He's got stage 4 Parkinson disease. So we're really interested in getting this done as fast as possible while he's still physically able to work with us. Anyway, just delighted he's coming.
That's good.
It's tough.
Mark, I got Eon Timeline.
Hey, Gabriel.
Gabriel and Christopher, welcome. Peter, hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I guess we can start with introductions. We mostly know each other, so I think they can be quite quick. But well, actually, I don't know. Should we?
Yeah, so let me do that since you put me in charge of moderating today.
Yeah, my last mistake.
All right, everybody, I'm in charge. Oh, wow. Okay. Power is all mine. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so we have some new folks here, but I'd like to start with the new folks introducing themselves, and then the folks that have been around can introduce themselves. So let's start with Christopher Gutteridge. Just say a few things of who you are and what you're interested in.
Okay, so I'll turn on camera briefly if I remember where the buttons are. Sorry, I'm not used to Zoom. Okay, I'm going to keep camera off mostly just because I find it easier. But my name is Chris Gutteridge. I'm a research programmer for University of Southampton. I got introduced to Frode as someone so that you two talk to each other and like, mate, it's like Chris, you'll actually care about this stuff he's talking about, and I did, which was annoying. But and then Frode tries to dangle interesting researchy things in front of me in the hope I'll bite on them. Um, but I've done various sort of little projects with Frode over the last few years, just trying stuff out. I like open data, making things join up that weren't supposed to, open access research, things like that. Okay, that's me.
Thank you. And let's turn our attention to Gabrielle. Hi, Gabrielle. Many of us know you already, but some folks don't.
Yeah, sure. I'm Gabriel. I'm based on Madrid, and I've been working on a hypermedia system that I used to call Minter, but now it's called Seed Hypermedia. And basically, it's an open hypermedia system that tries to revisit the web for web publishing, decentralized and inspired on Augment and Xanadu.
Great. Well, we see you a lot at the Hypertext conference.
Yes.
Which is
Yeah, I've been involved with the community for a couple of years now. I wish I could participate more, but I'm a bit busy surviving the company. And hopefully soon I can be more active
well, thank you for being
again.
here today.
Thanks
And
for
now
having
we
me.
want to introduce Karl. Why don't you say a few words about yourself? We'll go to Karl, Frode, Mark, Rob, and then we'll start the next round.
Hi, I'm Karl Smink. I'm a PhD student at Mississippi State University. I am currently doing my dissertation work on text entry in VR, and as part of that, I am developing a new interface to type in VR. Previously, I did my master's thesis on locomotion in VR and developed a new locomotion method that proved better than point-and-click teleportation, so I have high hopes for this as well. And I did 3 years of work at the Army Corps of Engineers making simulation software before I went back to school. Over.
Great. Hi, Frode.
I get to introduce myself. Oh, cool. Okay. I have one mission in life, and that is to help us think and communicate better with text. And now, because of Brandel, who will be here, I hope, my current mission is just to wake people up, and you are all awake, so I'm just telling you, to think about XR before it becomes normal, to get as much imagination recorded as possible, and which is what today is about. So with that, I will shush.
Mark Anderson.
Hi, I've been doing things with future and text, gosh, since about 2017. Basically, my area of interest and research is hypertext. I'm sort of have a least affiliation. I'm a visiting fellow at Southampton University as part of WACE. But as I say, my main wheelhouse is hypertext. And I just give a shout out to Chris. I think he sells himself short. Does really interesting stuff. We're paths across in the waste department there. And he's very, very good with things like open access data and that kind of thing. Thanks.
Rob Swigart.
That's me.
Yes.
Writer, former academic, former journalist, former game designer, former futurist, former bunch of other stuff. Now just gradually subsiding into the background noise.
Never, jamais, pas du tout.
Hi everyone. So future former prototypist, I guess, but honestly, I just can't help myself building prototypes, mostly with those things. So VR, AR, XR headsets to organize my mind. And I'm here thanks to Brandel a couple of years ago, where we discussed about XR to organize thoughts and notes and whatnot. And he also indeed suggested to have a chat with Frode and to come join the Monday meeting. And I've been there ever since. And now with a bit more energy and resources to work on prototyping for the Sloan Foundation grant and implement whatever crazy ideas you all might have.
Professor Abhirami. You're muted. You want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi.
Tell them who
Human.
you are. Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Abhirami. I'm a PhD student in English at IIT Kanpur, and I am studying contemporary experimental narratives, textuality, and also cultures of reading.
Welcome. And then we have Chris and Peter.
Yep. Hello, I'm an independent researcher interested in all things distributed and decentralized. Have some academic and work background in that area, and have a project called InfoCentral that's kind of a little bit on hiatus, but hope to get back to it soon.
Great. And Peter?
Okay, I'm an attorney, programmer, and independent scholar. Technical interests include end-user programming, parsing, local first, standoff markup, interactive fiction, secondary interests, world's fairs, theme parks, cities of the future, so I'm all over the place academically. And I came into this group, well, indirectly through the hypertext community, which I first encountered at a Macworld Boston, way back in the day when I was talking to someone in a show booth, and they said, "You just have to meet Mark Bernstein." And that changed the whole trajectory of my academic career.
He does that. He's dangerous.
Yeah.
Did the same to me. All right, so today we're talking about XR and interfaces, and Frode is going to be talking about making a presentation. So Frode, would you like to start?
I would love to start. I'm going to try to keep it between 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll go into the dialogue. But just want to amplify what Mark said earlier about Chris. I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but at Southampton was basically Mark, Chris, and me doing lots of discussions all over the place. Chris basically knows the deep depths of everything of the realities. So I'm so grateful that he's part of this conversation with us today because he's a busy man. Right, so ready for the slides. Here they are. If you can't see them, hang on. There's too much Slack stuff in the way. You can see my screen, right? Right. So just what Dene said, we're going to be looking at, I have put, by the way, in our chat, a link to the Google Doc. It's also on the website on today if you want to write notes during this. Of course, you can interrupt me with questions, but this is just to provoke a little bit of a dialogue. I'm going to look a little bit about the substrate, active reading, and components for authoring, because we need to be creative. We need to know what components, what things we have to play with, right? So also tell me if you disagree with this one. The ideal volume being Rob Swigart volume of space of knowledge, not volume like a boring book. The aims are to be highly interactive when authoring and reading. Should be viewable in many ways, including boring long form, spatially hypertext, etc. The etc. here is doing a lot of heavy lifting, as they say. Also, it should ideally be possible to immerse yourself in it or read it in context with other things. I don't even know what the word reading means here. We're going to discuss it. It has to also be accessible to some degree, to some level of experience in 2D. And really importantly, to be academic, it has to be possible to be cited.
So can you explain why it has to be accessible in 2D? What parts of it?
Exactly. That's up for discussion, what parts, but some of it, the basic core knowledge for longevity, for being interconnected with other media, so you don't only have to put on a headset to experience this. But of course, the experience of watching and interacting in XR will be very, very different from a very flattened, poor version. But it shouldn't be, at least for the next period of time. But Dene, thank you for highlighting that is not necessarily a simple thing, or it shouldn't necessarily be a thing. If someone wants to make something entirely for XR, fine. This is mostly within relatively the current academic community. So questions then become things like, how should the elements of your volume, what should they be and how should they appear? How should the source material be available and how should it appear? How should your work environment be? And maybe above all, or underneath it all, how should we be able to interact with it? These are the kinds of things we hope we can get into today. We're a research group, so we're looking at more, better questions, not trying to come up with simple answers. So the more way out, the more better are. For context, this weekend saw the anniversary of the beautiful Macintosh 9-inch screen. Today, many of us routinely work on 4K screens. So of course we know Moore's law and all of this, but if you then look at an 8K screen, there is more workspace. However, the XR environment doesn't have a frame. This substrate has no frame, really important. And that is one of the reasons we should utterly ignore the current hardware.
Can I interrupt for a second, Frode?
Of course.
We're trying to get into the Google Doc and I can't get in and nor can Peter. I'm using my Gmail account, which is my normal account.
It shouldn't matter. So thank you for saying that. I will.
Because I just sent a note request edit access. So you might want to open that up so we can make comments as you're talking.
Yeah, try again, please.
I open fine.
Okay, I've changed it, so you should now get the whole package.
I'm not getting it at all.
Yeah.
That's weird. I got 10 weird animals on here, so at least
Same problem as Dene. I get an error occurred. It pops up a little dialog box about an error. The document's behind it. I can see the document's there, but it's sticking its stupid error dialog box in front of it.
And I'm seeing you're in there, Frode, and you've got your green line and your name shows up when you're moving around. But I see different other people, potentially anonymous, elephant, gopher, 5 more, but I'm not in.
I'm sending the link again in a different way, see if that makes a difference. If not, please note down independently and paste in. Yeah, so okay, I'll just skip past this, but this is the really important thing, of course. When you're dealing with a frame, you can stick things onto the frame, right? So first of all, when we think about this, let's not think about current headset limitations. This is for the long haul. But so far, most of our knowledge has been framed, whether it's as a document or a picture, a screen, digital, or whatever. And you stick things at the top of the screen, on the side, at the bottom. We don't have that in XR. And that's
okay. I see the problem. It's working in Chrome, but not in Safari.
Okay.
That might help.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Peter. So text has always had a frame, even going back to the Sumerians. So we should probably look for other areas of inspiration like music, sculpture, and architecture. And I think particularly sculpture has a lot to offer. So that's a really fruitful area for us to look into. Now, one thing to really highlight is that linearity does not come from text. It comes from printing. Look at Isaac Newton's notebook here. If you wanted to do a knowledge map, you did a knowledge map, right? It's what we're living in today is so tunnel vision. You're either in Microsoft Word or the web or email and so on. This is the opportunity of XRs to get away from this. I hope we will.
Can I ask a question about that? I mean, I'm not trying to push back. I'm just a question. A lot of stories were written a lot of stories were told before they were written down, and they were linear. How do you explain that?
Oh, I can answer that very easily, because humans live in time and time is one-dimensional.
Yeah. So it wasn't print that put us into linear. It made us express things physically linearly, but our minds have been able to do linearity for a long time, right? Because of time.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with that, both what you're saying and what Chris is saying. All I'm pointing out is that even if we go back to 1968, November, Doug's demo, he drew a map on the screen of where he wanted to pick up several things on the way home, and he wrote, with the lines he wrote things, you could click on it and we'll go to that page. Today, we can make an image map, but we can't easily make such a thing anymore. It's gone from our capabilities. Right, it's really weird. If someone technical with Blender and 3D and all of these things can do it, but if you wanted to make the Sir Isaac Newton map on the right here interactive, you can't do it with normal Office software. That's kind of what I was pointing at. And that's what we can't afford to stay within. It has to be richer, right? I'm going to fly through these next few slides, lots of keywords. These slides are online, but the whole thing, publishing, we're not going to look at that at all today. We're going to look at thinking and writing. But first, the really, really important thing of active reading, because especially if you're doing academic writing, you need to figure out your sources. You need to get your inspiration. So we have a source document here, which has come into this world, either as a JSON data object or as a converted PDF. We, at least for thinking about this, we're not dealing with dead PDFs, okay? I'm a PDF guy in many areas, as most of you know. Here, no, absolutely not. We're constructing it so we can, while thinking, ignore current document limitations. We really have to try to not think about that. This is something Mark Anderson says often. We shouldn't think in terms of documents or the old stuff. Absolutely not. I completely agree. So active reading involves highlighting text, commenting, and notating text. These are really important affordances we have to some degree already. And of course, in XR, we can extract things into space. Also very important is the annotated bibliography. You read something, copy bits out with citations so you know where to find it again, so that you are beginning to build the guts of some new knowledge. You're basically doing research. The whole point of that is all of this then becomes available for you to put in your manuscript, right? And of course, when you're done with your manuscript, you export either to JSON, so it's viewable again by someone else, or you flatten some of it to a PDF. And importantly, the object you have built is now richly interactive for the reader. So you can have all kinds of view specs and all kinds of fun things. Right, active reading, that becomes part of your sources, the documents that you have read. You also have your own notes, knowledge map, 3D objects, and so on. So important, you can't just show everything all the time. It has to somehow be filtered and somehow be presented in different forms in some kind of an environment, whether it's a gray neutral or whether it has more detail. That is something for us to discuss. And then there's the actions of reading, viewing, all of these things. I'm just trying to show there's a lot of things on here. So if we look at the volume you're constructing, I like to look at it in two ways. Nobody has to agree. This is purely to get some kind of reaction. There's the core document of the structure of the document, which is body text section headings. Bob Horn talked about this at length, which we're grateful for. Even adding a heading is adding structure to the document. Structuring your thoughts is a really core part of writing, obviously. In addition to that, we have what might be considered contextual, such as glossary, embedded media, and so on. I'm saying it partly because it's conceptually relatively easy to display, quote unquote, next to your main document. Right, in closing, we have all these different kinds of sources for your document, including all the documents you've read, 3D objects, visualizations, all these fun things we need to decide on how they should exist for you. And then we have interaction elements, and here we really, really need to keep looking. I mean, one thing is using a 3D pen or a 2D pen, right, which may have a Bluetooth keyboard. Also, the physical table that's in front of us could be used. If something's overlaid, it's nice to have a hard substrate. And then the notion of apparel, putting on different virtual glasses to have different views. Maybe you put on a different shirt that gives you different affordances, you know, where you touch it. Maybe you quite literally wear a different hat. I don't know. But these are beginning of the kind of elements we have. We, of course, also have embodied controls, our eyes and ears, but also our torso. In some military games, you have to touch up here to get the microphone. Your map is on your back and so on. We've talked in our community about, well, we already have from year one, controls on your fingers. What about using your whole arm, etc.? And that then goes into looking at what do we mean by constructing a volume? Do we mean just a column of text? Do we need it spread out in many columns of text? Do we mean maybe some kind of a nodal situation? Are we talking about shapes? Are we talking about being in a shape? These are the questions. And here's the last slide. I just wanted to say we're talking about a magical knowledge base with magical interaction capabilities. I'm going to take off sharing, and I would really like to hear all of you talk about how you would want to construct in XR, construct your volume. So thank you for your kind attention. Dene, back to you.
Okay, there's been folks putting things in the chat because we can't get into the Google Doc. So I'd like to look at some of these in the chat, and then we'll go to the Google Doc. So I asked the question, are we developing for the present in our project or the future, or a little bit of both? Because it seemed like for the longest time we've been talking about somewhere in the future, right? And so what you're suggesting is that we need to breadcrumb all the way to the future. And so potentially the 2D is that, right? Because the future probably is going to be 3D if we're in an XR environment, heavily XR, heavily 3D. Mark Anderson, let's see, I've got Leon saying extended file attributes of today's file systems can also be used for storing JSON knowledge trees links. And he's got some information there. So, and then in the Google Doc, I'm not seeing anything from anybody. I'm guessing it's because we had a hard time getting in while you were talking and didn't want to interrupt too much.
I did. You were the only one, Dene, who requested access. You have now been granted. It is set to be anybody with a link can be an editor, so it's very odd.
I can suggest, I just can't write, so I can actually make some suggestions in here. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at the comments here on the side. Dene is the moderator, but just in terms of shaping the discussion, I don't want to
Yeah.
talk about data today. I don't want to hear anything about JSON, anything about any of that stuff. Because Dene asked a really, really important question. What time frame are we talking about? We're talking about the unknown future, let's say 5-10 years, right? And all of these things, of all these acronyms, they need to support the vision. But Mark has been really, really pushy on, let's not think in the old terms. So today, let's pretend we're Harry Potter. So no data talk, I would request. Just if we have magical infinite vision, magical classes, what can we do? Over.
I'd like to foreground what we're talking about for folks that are new here. So the Future of Text project in XR is a Sloan Foundation grant. We're in our year 2 of this. We divided into reading and authoring, decided at the middle of the first year that we can't divide those two so readily, but we focused a lot on the reading process. Now we're looking at authoring and using active reading as our base, right? So that's where we are currently. The argument we made in our grant was that we were looking to the future at a time when we're all wearing headsets and experiencing the world in the XR environment, whether it's AR or virtual reality or mixed. That's the future. And we wanted to get our hands on this as academics and artists and designers, programmers, theorists, before a big company took it and Microsoft it to death, right? So the question that I asked is not a simple one. It's like, and we're talking about people that are focused on the present. We're so inculcated with what we have currently in our fingertips, but we're asking us to push ourselves in the future and imagine what possible things are going to happen and how it's going to transform the way we think and write and read. And in that kind of concept, what is it that we're trying to develop? What is that volume? What is it that we're trying to, how are we going to express ourselves in this new environment? And is it 2D, 2.5D, 3D? Could be 4D, right? So Leon, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Can you
Leon?
hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I was lowering when Frode said there's no talk about data. I was like, oh shit. But anyways, in the meanwhile, I got some other ideas. But so, yeah, what I found interesting about Frode's thoughts and your introduction is that. So on one hand, we have like, what do we want to communicate, but also the frame Frode showed. Like I was also thinking, like a frame is not only a reference point, but it's also something you can usually stick things to or put a sticker on or whatever and pass it to somebody else. So yeah, I was thinking that maybe just to put it out there, maybe it will be some kind of like basically a sort of mixed bag of short videos, pieces of text, fragments of text, and which basically starts to float in front of you when you open some kind of book or frame. And I still think I know I'm saying the word book, and actually we should forget about all these things, but I still think it needs to be opened like a folder, so that we can like physically with our hands or something collapse it, so before sending it over to somebody else or throwing it or swiping it into a certain direction. I think this opening and closing and basically seeing all these small elements, could be short videos, pieces of text coming out or going back into it, or a box. I think that could be a useful metaphor to quickly manipulate data and hand it over to somebody else.
So just to summarize, before we move to Frode, we're looking at multimedia elements that include everything from video, images, words, sound, other kinds of formats, as a form of text. Is that correct from your perspective?
Oh, you're asking me.
Well, Leon said that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that properly before we move to the next. Yeah.
So I was not really thinking about whether how these multimedia elements are represented, if they are represented as text or not. But that's a good question, perhaps. Yeah.
Frode had his hand up first, and we'll go to Rob, and then Peter, and then Christopher.
Just going to
Frode?
highlight, thank you, Dene, that showing hiding in space management is absolutely huge, Leon. I agree with you. It seems like we have infinite space. We do not, especially when we're seated. So to be able to hide things and bring them back, how you connect things is going to be an absolutely huge issue, and it's super exciting. Over.
Okay, thank you. Rob, you're next.
I've been talking about tiles, but I'm thinking now that Harry Potter would take an animal or an object of some complexity and say a magic word, and it would become an egg that you can then pass around. And since an egg is the source of things, that maybe this is an idea, but I want it tagged with easily accessible icons or pointers that let you know what it is. So for instance, if it's 3D, the depth could tell you how important or how extended whatever that is could be. Just to instantly know that. And one thing I've been talking about with Mark is the idea that the timeline could be visual spectrum. So things that are near are infrared, things that are far are ultraviolet. So just a color identification that tells you where it is in the timeline, things like that. So
That's interesting.
Something visual and maybe even sounds associated with it. So
Interesting. Thank you, Rob. Peter, then Christopher, and then Mark.
Okay, when I'm looking at a document, I'd kind of like to have maybe little tiles with photographs of any people that are discussed in the document floating off in one cluster on the side, another cluster of tiles with photos of any locations that are referenced in the text. And as I'm moving through the text, I want those to change dynamically. Also, I want to have quotations and incidents or stories as first class elements. So, for instance, there's the story that the original Epcot was supposed to be a dome city, and it turns out that that was a misnomer. There were actually going to be some small, basically square block area size mini domes covering pieces of the shopping center area, but some reporter had gotten a photograph of that small section of the model and thought that that tiny little segment of the model represented the entire city on the massive mega scale. So you have that story. It appears in lots of different places. So if that story is referenced, I'd like to be able to bring up all of the other places where the story itself was referenced, what sources it came to. There are a few web pages that talk about it. An awful lot of books get it outright wrong. So you'd want to have some sort of an errata mechanism so that if I'm looking at a source that's doing the story that it was going to have a dome over the entire city, I'd have it flagged that, oh, there are also these things addressing that point and correcting it somewhere, which normally wouldn't be linked to the document proper because no one would have ever thought of that at the time because, of course, the author wasn't aware that he was perpetuating an urban legend.
That's great. Thank you, Peter, for that. That's very helpful. Christopher, their hands up, and we got Mark.
Okay, so the first thing is you're talking about sort of encapsulating things and hiding, strategic hiding for sanity. And it feels very much like files on a computer and I think the 3D equivalent in some ways is geometry. A bunch of things that are interrelated and able to interact with each other and probably mediated through the same storage. But it's very likely that in a 3D space, you might want to have several different geometries open at once, and you might then have some connections between them that other people can't see and that only exist in your environment. But I might have 3D Wikipedia and a map of Earth open, and those are both provided by other people, but I'm then creating my own links between them. But those are then mediated potentially on another server, and I can only treat them as almost read-only, or if I have rights, I can change them, but they maybe change for everyone. And I imagine you'd almost have little suitcases containing worlds and potentially open several on your desktop at once or merge them, but they'd all be controlled by different servers, and that would be just what you have in your workspace in your world. And then your world would just be another one containing these sub-geometries, a bit like having links to files. But I also feel morally obliged to say something challenging now because Frode and Mark bigged me up. So I've been trying to think of something a bit out there, and we've talked about you're all imagining authoring things in solitude. And I'm imagining I don't like VR very much. Frode keeps putting them on my head and going, "Isn't it awesome?" But I do like the augmented reality more, where I can actually still see the world and don't feel like I'm going to be stabbed in the first minutes of a murder mystery, because I'm so vulnerable. But one of the things I realize is if you're authoring something in the real world, you're surrounded by real world objects. And when someone comes into the room, I want their metadata. I want that object to be part of my 3D world. I want Frode to be tagged in my 3D world. I want this book I'm reading, both this copy and the abstract concept of this copy, and through to all the items in my space can be part of that. And they should all have temporary identities for what they are so that they can be included in your 3D virtual world or an augmented reality world. Real things need to be tagged to virtual things.
I'm going to stop you there because that's two big things that we're thinking about, right? And I want us to not be able to have to think about too much stuff at one time. So I wish you were here when Fabien and I were talking about non-Euclidean geometry. That might have been a very interesting topic for you, and I think we would have learned a lot from what you were just saying. So, all right, so let's go to Mark.
Yeah, I'm on. Good. Yes, a couple of quick things. I'd sort of restate the thing I said in the sidebar. One of the things that I'm coming to see is we want to stay away from premature formalization. And I think, for instance, we're drawing false distinctions, for instance, between text and data. It's all the same. If I have a bit of text that's I can't see, is it text or is it data? And so there's this problem of sort of moving the design into the sort of exploration space. And also think back to Joyce's Sarin Shapes, 1988, when obviously things were less technically developed than they are now, but he drew an important distinction effectively between an exploratory mode, which confusingly he called constructive hypertext, and something that is designed for essentially reading or consumption by others, which he actually called exploratory because at the time this was all very novel and you would go and explore something somebody had written. The two can exist together, but I think they're sort of quite separate modes. And one of the things that's most useful about the richness you can have in a sort of the plasticity of an XR space is just being able to do multiple different presentations. The issue becomes that it becomes very much unintentionally like a memory palace, in that what is apparent to me may not be apparent to you because it's my mess. So I instantly understand it. I know why the mess looks like it does. Partly because I'm not investing unnecessary effort in making it look tidy, because the only reason I need that might be to explain it to a third party. And this gets confusing because we get very excited about collaborative spaces, but they often don't work. And I think this is one of the reasons, because it's actually quite confusing. But the power definitely is having an exploratory space and being able to present things as we need. I've been talking with Rob in the side about the way that you can repurpose things, but his volume has all sorts of things, some which might be whole chapters of text, some which might be annotations. And how they're visualized and how they're represented really is a matter of what you need them to be at the time. So one of the interesting challenges is, how much they need to know about themselves that they can be a useful member of the space. And I'll stop.
I'm going to stop you right there, Mark. That's great. So we have three overarching concepts that have been introduced, right? Or actually four. Past, present, or at the same time. What do we mean by text? Metadata in a space, automatically there, present, so that we can access it. And then this idea of exploratory spaces, right? So that's four that I've heard that we're going to be talking more about. So Frode?
Just writing notes here on the margin. So Mark, it's such an important point you brought up. And of course, I can cite your paper on this, 7 hypertext. The difference between hypertext for thought versus hypertext for presentation is really, really crucial. Completely agree that it's super important that we need different view specs or rooms for different aspects of this. So here's the thing, in preparation for this kind of thinking, I've really been working on the map in author. What I found is that even now when I can link to my own documents, it doesn't necessarily solve problems. It makes jumping around, but it doesn't make jumping useful. So now I'm working on how to have the system know what documents are available. And also, to my surprise, linking to folders is really useful, because I may not have defined already what I want to link to, but I have defined a location for where specific kind of stuff will be. And on this note, a final thing is, when you mentioned metadata in this context, Dene, the metadata realization for me, which became my PhD, was the game Crisis. Sorry, there's a typo in the chat here. Crisis, which is an open world game. And the developer, when asked how come the AI was so great, and he said, making the AI isn't that difficult. This game is like 2015. He said, the key is to make everything in the environment know what it is and make it possible to communicate that. So if you have a piece of wood, can you see through it? Can you shoot it? Does it burn? All of that stuff. So yeah, we have to make an assumption for the sake of our authoring discussion that everything in XR knows what it is, can say what it is, and hopefully it's in an open way, not owned by Apple, Meta, or Google, or whoever in the future. But yeah, we will make the assumption things are known. Over.
All right, thank you. And then now we're back to Peter.
Okay, also, I think there are two parallel notions of time involved. There's event occurrence time, and there's event or concept documentation time. Lots of times you'll have the publication date of a book, and a book that might have a publication date after another book will actually have been based on research that occurred before the book that was published at a different time sequence. So you think that something's later, and it might actually represent earlier research, but it didn't get entered into the document record until after something that came out before it that was more current than it is. So you have this crazy notion. You have the timeline of the events that are being talked about in the works. You have the timeline for when the events actually enter the record with a formal publication date. And then you have another timeline of when the research that went into the publication artifact was occurring.
I'd like to respond to that. In literary theory, there's three types of time, right? The time of the telling, the time of the teller, and then the time of the intervention for interactive media, right? So traditional literature was the time the story took place, and then the time the person told the story to the reader. And then with interactive media, we added the third element of time. This is Espen Arseth's work in cybertext. And that's the time of the user intervention. And that changed everything, right, in terms of literary theory. So I think we're right on the same track there with this project that we're doing here and the way we're thinking about it. Absolutely. Gabriel, good to hear from you. You want to say something?
Yeah. I was for me, this question is I haven't think it so much about it, but so it's very hard to know. It's very hard to find what the VR is going to bring new to the what's the most important thing that's going to bring to the to improve the screens. And so I like very much the word, the concept that Mark Anderson used of memory palace. So I wonder, because I think that encapsulates very much what I like about VR. Is memory palace a thing in VR? Like, it's something that is discussed all the time. I mean, it's how much is used the concept of memory palace. I like the idea of a spatial navigation, like how the space affects your memory to memorize things and how to associate. And so I wonder, my question is, if memory palace is something that is used in VR a lot or how much?
Can I respond to that? It's interesting because one of the things that has happened, I talked to Bob Horn about this at length, because he talks about the 5 canons of rhetoric in his book, Mapping Hypertext. And he mentioned that he mentioned that there were certain ones that disappeared, that aren't used anymore. And I argued back with him that memory was so important for hypertext, especially because when you started making these large hypertexts with 6,628 links and 497 nodes, you had to remember as the writer where you put things. And so the memory palace became a really important thing. So memory became an important canon in the 90s onward for those of us producing these multimedia environments. And just one more example, even in something like a series of video pieces, like Bill Viola's work that was in the Tate Modern for the longest time. I'm not sure if it's still there. He had to produce a whole hallway of video works that talk to each other in terms of its design and strategy, but also contained information so that the information flowed. So you walk down the hallway, it's interactive. As you walk down the hallway, these videos would talk to you. And there was a cohesiveness across the design, but also the information that was being relayed. That kind of memory is required, that notion of memory palace, to know where you're putting this material, right? So it's a very interesting thing to think about, those 5 canons and how they have morphed through the ages, depending on the methodology of writing materials that we're using, right? Frode, you're next, and then Fabien.
I have a leading question, so I'm very happy to pass the torch to Fabien until there's a bit of calm or quiet.
Is there no calm?
No. I mean, if I have a leading question to people, so I'd much rather hear from Fabien first.
Okay, good. Okay, Fabien.
So on memory palace specifically, there are a couple of explorations on this. So you can build your memory palace in VR. I'll put links in the chat. But what I think has been the realization of it is it's amazing in the sense that you don't have noise. So you're in your memory palace and that's it. You don't have the outside world anymore. You can also have permanence with it, namely that when you remove the headset and you put it back tomorrow, the memory palace you constructed is still there. So those two things are extremely powerful. And in terms of memory, it's pretty amazing. But it comes at a huge cost. I don't know if you have experience with making your own memory palace without a VR headset, but basically the effort you put into designing that virtual space, let's say your house, and memorizing the little nooks and cranny, what is like a stain on the wall or whatever you might use to help, that's come pretty much for free. Like you just remember it. But if you have to design it in 3D, most of us who are not like extremely talented and extremely efficient at this, it's taking freaking forever. And when you have this, then that kind of like virtual house usually doesn't even look like your house. So it's pretty disappointing. So there are like huge benefits in terms of permanence, lack of distractions and all that. Also flexibility, like you can add rooms and scales and all this. But the amount of work needed to make it good in terms of quality for most people is prohibitive, pretty much. This is just like my experience and my interpretation of the different projects related to Memory Palace in VR. Obviously, it's still work in progress, and I'll put some of the link again in the chat. But it's it doesn't mean it's been this way, thus it must stop. And I think there are a couple of really deep and interesting questions in terms of like, if VR works so well in terms of piggybacking on our brain ability to, and for most people, not everybody actually, on remembering things in space. How does it work with Memory Palace when you need to add an item? Does it break the structure because you need like to add another room that does not exist? I mean, it prompts for a lot of really deep questions. But yeah, I think that's it's a costly process and a tricky balance to get.
Okay, Frode now wants to add.
No. I'm so excited by that. Because I agree with everything you said, Fabien. However, the however is my recent experience. So in my own software, I have a journal. I write every single day a little bit. Sometimes it's a lot of thought, sometimes it's a little bit, but that is the same as my map. It's the same document, and that is really, really important because the notion of changing view is key. Because if you can change view, you multiply the utility of the information. I could imagine exactly what you're saying. Walking around my house and making a memory palace would be a lot of effort, maybe not all that reward. But if you build it as part of building a journal or a journey or a narrative, and you can change how you view it, that's where I think the value is coming from. So combining basically Fabien and Mark's comments is is fascinating. I put some questions in the chat because this is too big a topic, and I'm happy to give back to Fabien if it's on the same thing. Otherwise, Dene, sorry, please.
Yeah, so if it is on the same thing, is designing that journey is precisely my point, that to design it well and to onboard yourself, your future self, and or others is really challenging. I'm not saying it's not worth it. And the few times I did try, it's very, it works, but like, is it because of the technology of it, or is it because the amount of effort you put into it, like find just the right 3D model or making it? Maybe that's why it helps you remember it. Maybe it is the design of the thing. I don't have an answer to this.
I want to mention something and then we'll turn it to Karl. I work with a lot of artists, saving their work, advising them on platforms to use for a project. And with a lot of folks that I work with, they have an idea, but the idea does not yet work in the technologies that we currently have. So they sit on the idea until enough evolution has occurred and something emerges for them to be able to communicate on that platform, right? Which is really interesting. So when Flash emerged, people were already trying to make animated works, right? Animated text. Flash just made it possible to do it easily, right? And then put it on the web and disperse it. I've seen this also with something like Unity, an Unreal Engine, right? I've seen it with Twine. I've seen it with a lot of different technologies. And so the idea that we have to see it in order to know it is not true. The whole point of being an artist is imagining something that doesn't yet exist. The drawback is they're not the ones to create the technology to do it. So the partnerships are important to work with engineers and programmers so that they can instantiate the things that the artist is thinking about. And it's that kind of collaboration that helps us move forward, right? Which is why this body that we are is important, right? There's things that Frode is imagining and he's trying to get across to all of us. There's things that I'm imagining, I'm trying to get across to all of us, things that Fabien knows and can do and getting across to us. So it's that kind of communication that's important. And Karl, I'll turn it to you.
So if you want to know the underlying reason why memory palace as a paradigm works, is there's psychology of neuroscience, which tells us that there's two major types of memory. There is recall memory and there's recognition memory. And recall memory is I need to think of a word, I need to just recall something just at a blank or just a straight draw. And recognition memory is when you link two or more items together. It is almost a factor of 10 easier to remember something if you link it to something else contextually, whether that is an object, a sound, a place, a time, it doesn't matter. If you can link two things together, then when you spot either of them, that link will activate the section of your brain that holds the other one. So in the memory palace, like if you say, oh, well, I've stored everything in the blue room, that has to do with all the books are in the blue room. Anytime you pick up a book, your brain will activate the section for blue and vice versa. So that's that one. As far as what Fabien mentioned of like, does it have to be exactly this or like why does this work? Memory is aided by context. So we've seen through dozens of research papers and experiments that repetition basically mathematically just does not help you commit something to long-term memory. Repetition just does not work as a method. You need separate contexts in order to imprint something better. So like Frode mentioned, is multiple different views for something gives you different contexts. So it could be visual, it could be auditory, it could be written, it could be text, it could be shapes. It doesn't matter. The fact that there's different contexts helps you remember it. So you'll see a lot of students say, you know, I'm a visual learner or I'm an auditory learner. And they say, well, I can't really just learn from a lecture. I have to go and do it this other way. It may not be that way is the only way that they learn or the best way that they learn. It may just be that after the lecture, when they go and put that same information in the new context, them now having experienced it in two different contexts helps them remember it better. Over.
I just think of it also writing, the notion of writing down with your hands and that motion, that connection between your fingers, your hands, and your brain, that also does something, right? There's a lot of data, a lot of literature about that, and the loss of that with people not writing things down anymore. Fabien.
A quick anecdote. It's a data set of one. It was just me, but my mother taught me how to read another language by saying the sentence, and whenever I made a mistake, I had to repeat it from the start. And I'm, of course, extremely lazy, so that made me really focused on it because I did not want to repeat. And of course, I do it once or twice. I don't focus, and like, wow, this is really boring. I need to get it done. And of course, the longer the sentence, the worse it gets. So basically, I think most of us, maybe lazy is the wrong way to put it, but if you focus on efficiency, which you probably want to if you're learning something, you will have an amount of effort that, it's probably it's linked to your goal basically and your objective. And if you have somehow like a cost function that is explicit, some way to say, hey, if I make a mistake, it's going to be challenging. I should not make a mistake. Thus, I will structure the information in an efficient manner. So writing down on actual paper or programming or doing whatever on your file system. If you're aware that not doing it correctly is going to be really a pain in the future because you have a direct way, like the example of having to repeat the sentence, I think that helps a lot. And how it's done, I guess it doesn't matter so much. Is it by writing with your physical hand on an actual piece of paper? But as long as you understand that not doing it correctly is going to be so costly, you must do it right, and just the effort makes it your focus, I think that helps.
The issue that Frode and I struggle with, and this is why I think it's important to have this conversation, is what does that environment look like? What do we need for that environment to look like? And how does text function in that environment? And so are we producing a skeuomorphic environment? I was just telling him this morning about I'm working out in Supernatural VR with my Meta headset, which is a very skeuomorphic experience, a little hyper real. I'm standing in Antarctica, looking at a coach who's shown me how to box properly, and then I'm boxing circles as they come at me, right, with my gloves, with my in my headset. Or is it what I've been imagining, a much more abstract environment with nothing to distract me at all? I find that in Supernatural, I'm very distracted by the birds flying overhead, the person talking to me. You know, I want to just focus. And for me to focus, just having the thing in front of me is how I do that, right? So what are we producing here? And that's the struggle. Like, is it going to be what we already know, or a hyper real version of what we already know? Or is it something that we don't already know? And that is the struggle. Is it a 2D text that we're looking at in the environment, or can we re-envision a three-dimensional volume, something with volume to it? And that is at the heart of what we're struggling with. And I know Frode has got his hand up, and so does Mark, so does Leon, but that is what I want you all to think about. And we've got to make a decision about this so that we can move forward with our project. That's at the heart of all of this. So Frode was being very polite when he was working through those slides, but essentially that's what we're looking at. Frode, let's have you talk.
I found it very useful to work through those slides. I spent a ton of time on them. Just there wasn't that much there, but just being able to kind of get to something in my head. But I really think we need to figure out a way to do both as opposing things positively. I really personally feel that the ultimate writing environment is a laptop screen, 13, 14 inches, something like that, writing as a card. That is my personal preference, right? And having that nicely connected to other things. So therefore, I think it is also a nice reading space. Again, my personal preference. Everyone else should be able to choose their own reading view spec, which is kind of the key thing. Another thing that I didn't mention is the really massive importance of colors, contrast, and the environment. In my own software author, I know that people use completely different color sets to suit their eyes. In XR, we must do the same, because just because Dene and I happen to like something doesn't mean it works for someone else's eyes, etc., right? That's just a human thing. But I really feel that we should focus, and this is just my feeling, focus on how do you have a card with key information that takes up quite a lot of your space, actually, in a context from any other cards. And how do you also just throw that completely away and have 3D, half being lighthearted, but hot metal type rendered as metal, floating in space, 3D. You know, what does that mean? Do these two completely different paradigms compete? Are they two different view specs, or can they overlap? I don't know, but I agree with you, Dene. We must examine that, Mark.
And it's not either or. I mean, I think the argument I've been making to you is having a choice of one or the other. I mean, we can't make everything. We can't make 10 different environments, and you pick one. Turn it off, turn it on. You know, that would be a way to go. But all right, Mark, your turn.
Well, just quickly to say that I think one of the things I'm sort of finding is that the power of this sort of space is most in its exploratory mode, and I always recoil away from the moment we start talking about what it's going to look like, because to me, what it needs to look like is what I need it to look like for the task I'm doing at the moment. So it may look like a card today, but it might look like a table tomorrow, indeed in a second's time, because I'm now doing a different task. So we need to be careful that the thought about design doesn't actually kill the very value of the plasticity of the environment. The really useful part about XR, be it 2.5D, 3D, ND, is that we can do things that we can't normally do in the literal in front of us, and it also allows us to literally pivot our understanding, our perception of these parts around us. I mean, I find it, so many years of work on other people's data, it's been really useful to start thinking about the points that Rob's made, that when he's writing something, he's got this whole host of attendant objects around what is going to be the narrative braid, or one or more narrative braids coming out of this whole volume. And they don't necessarily all need a form. What they actually need is a relevance. And what the relevance is almost shifts in terms of the question you're asking of the space. So I think of it, I think of the things more like if you have strong prototyping, if all these things can suddenly be the same and look the same, and then I can flip that based on the information the object has about itself, so that I can suddenly see them in relation to time, or I can see them in relation to a particular narrative braid, or some other thing like that. I think that's one of the most productive things that the space offers. And I'm also minded that, and as so Rod's reminded, it probably isn't the place where you're going to sit and do what we think of as writing in the way that we would have literally written an essay on a page. The writing, the textual creation that you might do is probably more to do with metadata and annotation of the objects in there, which you then take out to a calmer, more ordered space to do the more linear construction. Thanks.
Mark, I think Leon's next, but I want to respond. When I sit down and read the paper in the morning, I'm not reading a paper anymore. There's no paper. It's all electronic, right? And so I still say read the paper. I'm going to read the paper, and I'm not reading paper. So I think a lot of this is also the legacy vocabulary, right? That we're tasked with, like book. I mean, book has a sense of what it is, and that's not what it's going to be in the future. And the book didn't exist in Odysseus in the time that Homer was writing down, or the Homeric poet was writing down Homer, the Odyssey. And so all of these things are shifting. And the vocabulary helps us. What it does is it pins the butterfly so hard, it's hard to get shaken away from it. Text is a little more fun because text is a little more liquid. And I'm going to go to the hand that was, Leon was first, then Peter, then Frode. Leon?
Yeah, I was just thinking, how much into the future are we thinking here? Because I'm trying to remember the infographic of Frode. Is it also possible that authoring will be done by eyes? I mean, we have different interfaces these days. Now the eye controls, and also I think also neural control is getting it's getting pretty advanced these days. So yeah, that was just where are we putting the sci-fi limits here?
It's a good question, but I'm not too worried about that side of it, because even if you do it through your brain, you're still going to have to put a shape to it. So how, like Mark said, the text may be typed somewhere else, but you're still going to have to, through some action, make a this go there and a that go there. So.
Okay, Frode, is that your comment? Or is your
No,
hand down?
that was just a reply to Leon right there.
Okay.
Oh, trust me, I have a Mark comment coming after Peter.
Okay, Peter.
Okay, do we want to make use of speech recognition as an input modality, or possibly I'd really like to revisit stenography, only instead of having a steno keyboard, maybe it could be based on hand positions instead of the normal steno keys. But the steno approach of keying in sounds and then having that run against a dictionary to come up with the correct spelling in order to put something into print has proven to be much faster as a means of text entry than conventional typing. It's really amazing what a stenographer is able to do in real time. So, and then the question there becomes, how much time and effort do we expect a user to be willing to spend to learn to adapt to use the tools? Doug would have had the user actually be significantly trained to make optimal use of the technology, sort of co-design it with the user. These days, people want to just come in with absolutely zero training and use a piece of software and have a different app for every single sub-fragment of functionality that they might want to be using, which I absolutely despise, but it's the way the world went because it works for optimal billing and app store models. And I don't want to get into an app store model where you have a choke point. I want to have really broad and deep tools like Tinderbox, where you can push the tool in any direction you want it to go, where you have built-in scriptability inside the environment, and you're not dependent upon a developer providing the bit of functionality that isn't there initially. Oh, also,
right.
in a completely different use case, I also envision wanting to use the environment to be working on typesetting, authoring, in which case I'm dealing with the LaTeX environment, and we have dozens and dozens of packages that all specify their own internal syntax to provide different typesetting affordances for, here are going to be tables. We have this separate package that's going to provide us with the script of the elves from Tolkien's world. We might have another package that provides parallel text side by side, where we want to have one range in one column of text be directly linked to a translation that might be expanded or contracted relative to the size of the original. So in that case, I'm going to want to have a ton of documentation. I'm going to want to have, documentation on all these different packages floating around in three-dimensional space instead of being limited. I think that'd be a real godsend when I'm dealing with something where there's a profusion of documentation that I have to have handily available. So there, the XR case is just wonderful because I'm not limited to the available space on my desktop before I start getting things covered up.
Great, thank you.
Completely different kind of writing than just free-form writing, where you're not dependent upon reference to documentation and strict formatting.
That's exactly what we've been talking about, and thank you for reminding us, Peter. That's exactly right. We offload a lot of these activities into the VR environment that we can't do in real life, right? And Frode, you're back now. I'm guessing this is going to be your provocation again?
Yeah, a little bit. When it comes to how we get the text in there, I really don't care for this kind of a discussion. I mean, Karl here has built a new way of typing, which is great. So if someone wants to use that, if someone wants to use speech, which I do not think is a good idea at all, because speech uses a different part of your brain than typing. If someone wants to use a Bluetooth keyboard of this, that, and the other design, that is fine too. Where I, of course, agree with Mark about the importance of being able to change what you have. We still need initial views we have to decide on, some kind of views. And Dene has really helped me understand the importance of doing an annotated bibliography, because an annotated bibliography is by nature rich with metadata. That's what it is. You can't just write something. You have to say where you got it and what it is. So having it as part of an academic process, even though we may not only be talking about academic authoring, gives us a little bit of that for free. But I still would like, after Chris, for you guys to talk about, you have some knowledge in front of you in textual form. Let's say it is a virtual piece of paper, PDF, floating in front of you. How do you want to tear it up? How do you want it to be in a completely different way? let's think about it as pure magic. It is a piece of knowledge, got some paragraphs, few headings. Off to Chris, please tell me your way of cutting into it and chewing it up.
Chris.
Okay, so the dear ChatGPT, please divide this up for me into sections. And you were talking earlier about sorry, this is a response to an earlier comment I've been thinking about the how to author something in 3D and find exactly the right model. No one's going to do that. They're just going to say, "Can you please make my house, but it's Hello Kitty, and there's posters on each wall, which I will populate with things from my work at the thing," and then it will just do it. And it seems, I mean, ignoring the horrible theft of creative property and the cost of environmental cost and everything, realistically, that's how people are going to do it. They're going to give a speech prompt of saying what they will want, and that will create a 3D environment of roughly that thing. And it'll be a bit crap, but better than they could do themselves, and they'll try a few until they get it right. Realistically, that's what people will do. Same as if someone wants an illustration for an amateur project, they don't hire someone to do it, they get AI to do it. It's got 6 fingers, but it's good enough.
Right. Thank you. Mark, you want to respond to that?
Well, I was actually thinking to the question Fred asked about, sort of starting states. And to me, the most sort of practical thing is some form of spatial hypertext. Now, whether the layout engine is a human putting things where they want them, or whether it's something deciding that this object is closer to that object for whatever parameter is available to it in the space is again a choice. And in terms of what you're doing, you may want one or the other, or a mix of both. But I would have thought that's plenty enough structure to get started. Anything more is premature formalization, because it's assuming there's a quite fixed structure to something whose structure you may not know. You might, if you were doing a deconstruction, so you were starting literally with a long form text, because the example I gave was a faux paper rectangle in space. Well, in that case, you might want a sort of deconstruction where you have a number of spaces where you might pull objects off into it. Essentially, you're doing a very low granularity of deconstruction. So, well, this thing is broadly relating to that, that's relating to this. But again, you don't want those to be too hard-edged. You don't want there to be some over-designed sort of thing you've got to look at. That putting them somewhere in space is something that just doesn't clutter the brain. Picking up your point about that, when you're trying to actually engage with the structure of the knowledge and the information you're working with, actually having birds twittering overhead can be, I think for a lot of people, but obviously not everybody, can be really distracting. So that the thing that you're trying to do is to interact with the information, for want of a better term, that you have. And those objects, for want of a better word, can be quite different depending on how you're trying to interact with a thing. You might ask to see something as a so dispatchous a set of sentences. You might just ask to have objects that effectively relate, that are sentence objects. You don't see the text, you don't really care what's in it, but you care that perhaps they're organized with the order in which you first came across them, for instance. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mark. And Frode, we're back to you. Frode, you're now
You're
muted.
muted.
Sorry about that. I was actually saying how much I agreed with Mark, which in this particular field isn't every day, so that's really lovely. I think the notion of 3D spatial hypertext is almost obvious for this. We have seen some others attempt to do it of varying degrees of quality. I think that where others have to message. I think that the reason you and I, Mark, have a really good tension on this is you really look from the data side and I look from the interaction side. So that's why I'm so glad you said what you said, because what I honestly think we should do as a community is to accept what you said. That's my feeling. We have little things floating in space. So then we can start talking about what should they contain, first of all. right? And this is something we've gone on and off for a long time. But if we make the premise that at the end of it, there should be a narrative, and by narrative, the original meaning of the word narrative apparently just means ready for narration, as in literally speaking out loud. There should be a followable thread, like presentation hypertext rather than thinking hypertext. If we make that our assumption, because within Sloan, and this call is not all about Sloan, but within Sloan, the ideal is academics can use this. So one thing, it's got to be citable, so it exists in academic space. And two, it's got to be able to make a point, not just be paint splatters on the wall. This is not a Jackson Pollock, right? So if we decide on that, we have to decide initially what should be in each of these little nodules or nodes or whatever we call them. Once we've decided on that, then Fabien, hopefully, if he wants to, can start designing different levels of showing what's in them. We can then start talking about the interactions, because the showing and hiding is such a big deal, right? So, show of hands, who likes the idea of authoring on tiny little, at least authoring to the level of thoughts on little floaty things? Or who wants a big sculpture to wrestle into shape? Yes, Dene.
Big. I don't know. I kind of think I think both, right? I mean, this goes back to what even Fabien has developed for us already, that he showed at the Future of Text Symposium. These incremental pieces, right? And this goes back to Tinderbox and Twine and Story Space. All of those nodes compose a larger concept, interactive novel, right? Digital poetry. So we think in increments, but we build ideas. So I think we need the building blocks that coalesce into the larger thought. At the same time, some people want to just put their thoughts down and the thoughts are large, right? I think about something like Howl by the Beat Poet, long text that rolled on the ground. I don't think there was many drafts of that. That was all done in a flow of ideas. So I think we don't want to say this or that, but maybe mende, which is Greek for both and.
Yes. However, we kind of have to choose initial views. And
well, small leading to big, right? I mean, that kills two birds with one stone.
Completely agree with you, Dene. And I think you and I said exactly the same thing. When I said narrative, what I mean is how do we take these little bits and form them into a whole? So absolutely the same thing. So obviously we're running low on time today, but one thing that would be really lovely to continue this discussion is if all of us who care enough about it start sketching this or writing a little piece on it and just say, be selfish as you possibly can, saying, I want. Right? I know I'm going to do it. I'm going to write, I want this. I want it to show that. I want it to be visualizable that way. And then hopefully there will be so much useful disagreement that we're going to have to look at what the structure has to be able to make these disagreements possible so we don't prematurely visualize it. How does that feel to people?
I feel like I agree with both Mark and Frode, which sounds funny because they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. I agree with Mark in that trying to pick a specific form for something that is still in the early design / conceptual phase risks that becoming the form or the paradigm just by the fact that it was the first thing or that it aged in or that we just never replaced it. And it may be something that was just selected either at random or with little thought, and it winds up being used as the form because any of us who have coded know that once you write code and it works, you don't touch it anymore. So I think Mark is concerned that if we find something that works, that we don't spend any time looking to optimize or make that better. But on the opposite, on Frode's side of the coin, if we never pick an initial form, because we're too worried about cementing it in place, then we can't get to the iteration and optimization stage. We can't actually test anything that we don't have on hand. So then we can't try to look for those better things. So I think Freud and Mark actually want the same thing, which is we don't want a suboptimal form, but like how we get to it is they're coming at it from different angles.
Right, thank you. And then
Agreed.
we have Christopher.
I have a constructive suggestion on this one. You could probably make a fancy name for this involving the word dialectics, but don't pick one form, pick two that are opposed to each other. Make it so that it has to fulfill two different visions at once and force it into that. So you're not picking 20, but just pick two that are almost iconic in how different they are. And if it can support both of those, it should have a large space between them.
Great. We've got 10 minutes. I want to say this, we have 10 minutes, and actually we have right at 10 minutes because some of us have to go to a meeting at 10, and we're just going to turn from this Zoom chat to this Zoom chat. So a bathroom break would be nice. So can I have Fabien weigh in and maybe one more comment from Frode, and then we'll call it a good day?
I'll be super quick. I think one of the biggest challenge we have is attachment. Like we get attached to ideas or prototypes or piece of code, we don't indeed want to re-implement or build it again, and we latch on what we've built so far. And I think that's, in my opinion, that's the biggest risk, because it basically weighs us down. So I think if we can just like throw so much, because we tried and it was interesting, we just build on the concept and try to implement again, even if it's again literally from scratch. I think usually it leads again because we're not like kind of it's not a project and we implement as like a product, because it's so exploratory. I think attachment, I don't want to sound too philosophical, but we need to detach ourselves too much from like latching and grabbing on.
Thank you. Brother, do you want to say some concluding words here?
It's so bizarre because there's so much agreement, all of us, towards the end here. We've decided we want things in space. We need to decide on not one, but two initial forms. We need to have deep discussions of what these items should actually contain so that they can actually have fluid shapes. And we should probably design them with a few design elements editable easily by the end user, such as color, etc. Just as one example, so that we don't just have a favorite thing and we stick with it. Absolutely agree. But in order to come up with these two Chris opposites, please sketch or write how you see it, because we're all looking at an elephant here and we're all looking at different aspects, right? So if you could please get that to the group through whatever medium you want, it'd be so incredibly useful, and you will then be a really clear part of what in the world can it be in the future. Karl, that's the weirdest little image you put there. And no Google Docs next time. This just didn't work.
It didn't work. We'll try something else. Hey, folks, I want to thank you for coming today. I thought this was a very fruitful and positive discussion. We got some good information out of it. I can't wait to see the AI summary that we'll get out of it. And Frode will be sharing that with us shortly. If you want to make comments and you want to add them and you can't get to the Google Doc, just go ahead and send them on to us, right? Drop them in the Slack channel if you're on Slack with us, or email Frode or me, and we will make sure they get into the website and to the information that we'll share. Next week, what are we doing, Frode? Update for next week?
Are we doing something next week?
Well, I mean, what are we doing next week? We're coming here.
I'm going to go to our schedule and have a look.
Frode's going to look at our schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I'll spend a minute going through that with everyone, actually, if that's okay. So today is the end of January. Next week, we're looking at hypertext workshop proposal discussion for ACM. But yeah, Dene, I'll just share screen and just explain to people how we're doing our record while we sign off. Is that
yes? And one other thing I'll mention is that we worked really hard to make year two, the Mondays, to be a little bit different. We have these short presentations, and then we have these longer or short discussions and then longer presentations. Last week we had Bob Horn. The week before that, Fabien and I talked about non-Euclidean geometry in relation to XR experiences. And then in February, what we're going to be doing is looking at the book and reading through some of those essays and talking about essays in the book. And so we'll be putting some information out to you all. So be looking forward to that. And in March, we're going to be bringing in some, since it's Women's History Month, we're bringing in some women to talk about their work and lead those discussions. So there's some really interesting permeations of how this group is meeting and discussing things. A little bit different from last year.
Yeah.
More manageable.
Very different. All right. Yeah, thank you, Dene. You have to rush. I just wanted to show everyone our... Okay, see you, Dene. See you Wednesday. Obviously, you know how to go on the web, but I just wanted to highlight how we're dealing with things now. So we have a journal, which is thoughts by people. It's where we intend to put articles when they're submitted so people can deal with them before turning them into a book. If you want to write a big one, go ahead. If you want to write a paragraph, do that. The point is, it's a holding point to something to refer to rather than Slack or Twitter where things just go into the ether, right? And then please have a look at the schedule. If you do the add to calendar, it goes in your calendar. And this is what we have. If you have people or themes to suggest for the future, obviously, you know, get in touch. So this is what happened. This is Bob Horn, mapping hypertext. So this is what he sent us up beforehand, useful stuff. And then you can see here a link to this the record of this event is now available. So as the video and the AI summary, plus at the end here, Bob has sent some further material. So we try to make this website quite a different thing. And to be very clear, we want to be useful, but we also want to impress new people. So if we invite someone into the group and they can see how we've been dealing with the record so far. So if you now click on record to go, you see it's a lot more, there's a lot more there. So the task of this community now, just to reiterate, I'm sorry, I hate it when other people repeat, but I think it's too important not to repeat. If you could write down somehow what these boxes in space should be for you, that would be insanely useful, right? I would love to have a section in our book at the end of the year just saying, these are the kinds of boxy things in space we wanted in the beginning. Make it playful, you know, and do whatever. And hopefully we'll find two styles, using the word style in the most widest sense, Chris Gutteridge style to fight in terms of requirements. That would be absolutely wonderful. And on that note, Fabien, where are you? Yeah, top left. On this, to make it useful for you, who's going to be playing around with the realities of this, do you have anything to add or subtract to what I just said?
Yeah, no, it's just like I mentioned, and you did also a couple of times. Yeah, if you have ideas or whatnot, sketch them away. It's very broad. Like sketch it if you want with words, if you want with Blender, 3D model, if you want with code, if you want with a pen, ink, really anything. Obviously, the closer it is, let's say if it's a 3D model done in Blender and there is some code next to it, it's going to be much closer to what you probably have in mind. But of course, it's hard to do. So any step along the way in order to like go from the abstract concept to a potential implementation will help. But don't shy away for something that is, again, just a thought. I really recommend any kind of sketching with any medium because it starts to have something on a more permanent substrate. It's a double-edged sword because if it's more permanent, then you have to make decisions. But again, that back and forth, even on your own, even if you don't even share it with us after, I think it's really worthwhile. Of course, if you do share it, please don't be shy about it. And it doesn't have to be like a formal presentation.
Don't go away. I have something to show you. Don't go. You can still hear me. I have my microphone. Don't go away. Okay, good. You're here.
A lot of suspense. Aha. It is real.
Right. The reason I'm showing you them, of course, I'm proud and happy, and I'm so appreciative for you, the community. This is the new one, printed. The first one used a different method. That's why it's a slightly different size. We may change that. But I'm telling you because I really want to encourage you. The future text publishing, whatever we call it, is tiny, nothing, right? It's all, I am a nobody. This is a tiny community. However, these things will persist. That is really, really important. The fact that we're not the most famous people in the world yet doesn't mean nothing. If you do contribute to this, in 10 years, 5 years, 1 year, 200 years, it will be findable. Right? That is why it's so important to have as many views as you can. When I got into this whole future of text thing way back, I was a Mac guy. I still am a Mac guy. Decided what was before the Mac. That's when I discovered Doug, etc. Right? To try to unlearn my love of the Mac to think wider was really hard. And that's going to be the same thing for everybody with the headsets. They're going to have their favorite headsets going to work like this. So by Wednesday, when we have a bit of a production meeting, if you, all of you, have sent a little sentence or something, it'll be the greatest thing. And we'll put it in the book. Right. We're 1 minute over. Shouldn't be over at all. Any other questions or comments? See you all on any given Monday. You're all open, welcome to all the meetings, absolutely no obligation to stay for the whole thing. Some people have lives, not me. I don't know what it is, but I've heard about it. So come and go as you want, and good luck with your kitchen, Brendel. Talk to you later, everyone. Bye, and thank you.